Mine was always just 2. Well, good morning, class. We're in Daniel 3, and Daniel 3 from the outset is something that most of us have heard about our whole lives. So how many of you had this book when you were a kid? And this is, let's see, volume 6. Takes 5 books to get to Daniel. And this is the golden statue being put up on the plain of Dura. And by the way, the scholars don't know exactly what the plain of Dura is. Don't ask me, I don't know either. There's debates about whether it was outside the cities of Babylon or whether it's between the old city and the new city, the wall that they put up in Babylon, but it doesn't matter. And here is the masses bowing down to the idol. Everybody remember that picture here in your brain? And there's the 3 that are not standing up. And here's the guy heating up the furnace. Now that is not a good depiction of the furnace because this furnace had a hatch on the top and a hatch in the front. And this only shows 1 hatch, but that's okay. The biblical drawers in this particular case, they got the gist of the deal. And then if you turn the page, if that furnace, hey Tim, she's over here now. Congratulations, man. Yeah, I won't say anything. I have kids. Okay, so this is the 4, not the 3, in the burning furnace, and way too close to the furnace. That furnace is 7 times hotter than it's supposed to be. But hey, we'll give the artist a little slack on that transaction. And the truth is, if you go read the story in the Bible story, it's actually pretty good. So if you got that sitting around on your shelf this afternoon, you got nothing else to do, and you want to see what it is when you were a kid, I remember the pictures vividly. You pick a Bible story, I remember in my brain exactly what the pictures look like. So what I want to do today is I want you to pull out your Bibles, and I want to go to Daniel 3, and I'm going to read out of Zdravko's text that he has. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay. So I'm in Daniel 3, verses 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide. How high is that?
Like 90 feet.
90 feet. 90 feet is tall, guys. How many stories is 90 feet, Mr. Architect? About 4 stories in modern day parlance. So could be more, depending upon the size of the ceiling. All right. It's a big statue. He then summoned, I love this, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come dedicate to the statue which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So we do it again. The satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all the provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, drum, and harp, bagpipes." Bagpipes.
You know that part, right?
Okay. In all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the midst of the blazing furnace. So if you've read anything in here, you know that the furnace was set up to make the statue. The statue was probably made out of bricks, and the bricks were fired in the kiln, and the statue was made, and then they covered the bricks with gold. Otherwise, you couldn't put a solid gold statue up. And that's the reason the furnace was there. So those are two purposes. It built the statue and it was going to fry you if you didn't bow down to the statue. Pretty good use of resources. All right. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, triton, harp, all kinds of music, they left out bagpipes. All the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the statue of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now let me turn over here. Then, furious with rage, just at that time, some astrologers. You guys talked about the astrologers last week, didn't you? And who bailed out the astrologers last week? And probably his three friends. So let's just understand. Just last week, we've got Daniel taking care of making sure the astrologers get to live. And now, just a verse later, at that time, some astrologers came forward and accused. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Has anybody said that? John, probably you had people say that to you. Oh, John, live forever. It was a very interesting system back then. O king, live forever. You have issued a command, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, triton, horn, now we come into bagpipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the statue of gold. And whoever does not do that, and the worship will be thrown in the midst of the blazing furnace. But there are Jews whom you have placed over the affairs of Babylon, i.e. last week, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to the real king. Never mind that I'm alive today because of it. All right. They neither serve your gods nor worship the statue of gold you have set up. And then King Nebuchadnezzar gets a little angry. He goes, this is he's furious with rage. He summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now let's just go through. Back in those days, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been anybody else, do you think they would have had an audience with the king? No. Somebody just tossed them in the furnace. Yeah.
You know, all the rest of the Jews bowed down.
Well, the commentary says that they're not sure what happened, and they're not sure where Daniel is.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's a very interesting story because you just don't know. Or it could be that they fried a bunch of Jews, and when they got to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king goes, whoa, those guys are important to me. I have no idea. We don't have any idea. Okay? So we can surmise. All right. So he brought them, so they were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the statue of gold that I've set up? He obviously knows it's true. Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, triton, harp, bagpipes, and all kinds of music, we're going to go through this all again. If you are ready to fall down and worship the statue I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the midst of the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hands? Now that, my friends, is an interesting transaction. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar. You notice they didn't say, O king, live forever. And you notice they didn't say, O king Nebuchadnezzar. They just said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the statue of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. And he had him bound, and his facial expression changed. That's what it says in the Bible. He ordered the furnace to be heated up 7 times. Now, it's not lost on you that the hotter something gets, the faster it burns and the less misery there's going to be. So if he really wanted to show us the misery, he should have just tuned it down a little. and thrown them in and roasted them slowly. Okay? I mean, I'm so sorry, but what's that? Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. He may not have been too bright if he was really furious. All right, sorry. Let's see, where was I before I get on my little tirade? Oh, yeah. Then he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them in the furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the midst of the blazing furnace. Because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot, the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the midst of the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there three men that were tied up and thrown into the midst of the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see four men walking around in the midst of the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the appearance of the fourth looks like one of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal administrators died by heart attacks right on the spot. Is that what your Bible says? That's what I think should have happened. Okay. They gathered round them. They saw that the fire did not harm their bodies, nor was there a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. We're almost done. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his messenger to rescue his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be torn limb from limb and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And there's the story, should you choose to believe it, which I choose to believe.
Amen.
Now, we're going to have a discussion about some things, but before we get into that discussion, I've obviously read a lot this week because you can't get up here and teach unless you're a biblical scholar without doing some research. And since most of us who teach are not biblical scholars, we do a little research. And I would like to go through some powerful lessons from this that is, as I read things, came to me. And then I want to get into some things that Timothy Keller thinks about the process. So we'll get into that first, actually. So first of all, Babylon is a great empire. If you've read the beginning of the commentary, you understand that. And they've conquered many people. And their methodology is this. They go in, and what they do is they take the professional classes back to Babylon, especially the young people in the professional classes. So the fact that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are alive in Babylon is because they had privilege in the Jewish kingdom before they ever got to Babylon. All right. So if you were not a person in the professional class, they either killed you or left you. All right. And then they set up somebody to rule after they came and took all the nobility with them back to Babylon. Now, the whole purpose was a subjugation through assimilation. I mean, the guy that ran this was not stupid. He knew that in about 3 generations, if he could get the young people in, get them trained in Babylonian ways, get them to have families and get their kids to go through the same process and to get those kids to go through the same process, by the 3rd generation, they were no longer Jews or Chaldeans or anybody else. They were Babylonians. All right. It's no different here. You have two people immigrate from some other country to America. By the time you get to the third generation, they're not Ukrainian, they're American. They're not Cuban, they're American. Sorry, John. You understand? I mean, but the fact that he just didn't white people out and he tried to make people wise in his own eyes and use nobility and wise people from around the globe to help him run his kingdom, that actually was pretty brilliant. All right. Daniel and his three friends were part of that class. So 3 thoughts from the passage. Timothy Keller has a lot of thoughts, thank you, on this lesson. And if you can't read this, I apologize. I'm going to read it to you, so don't worry. It's going to be just fine. So thought number 1, there is pressure in pluralism. There was pressure in pluralism in Daniel's time. There's pressure in pluralism today. That has not changed. So what does it say there? The king says, is it true that you do not worship the God that I have set up? So this is the culture of Babylon. What he's saying is, I want you to worship my God, and on your own time, you can worship whoever you want. Okay? So there's no big deal here. I'm not telling you you can't worship any gods you want. As a matter of fact, in ancient Babylon, there were temples set up to so many different gods. What he had done is set up a statue that was supposed to be the God above all gods. And he wanted you to worship his graven image. And these kids were not the 3 Stooges. All right? These were people of principle and people that were elect. These 3 were engaged in the culture, government, and politics in Babylon. Everybody knew them. The question is, will they bend to pluralism or not? And this applies to us as well. Look, do what you want to in private, but in public, this is what you're supposed to behave like, look like, and act like. And within a bell curve of society, as long as you fit into that bell curve, you probably do fine. And if you don't fit into that bell curve, you have a rough life. It also applies to business. So if you're working in an environment where the culture in that environment, so let's take my friend the lawyer on the back row. And here's what the law says. Here's the line. Below this line, actually it never works like that. There's a line that is totally right, and there's a line that is totally wrong, and in between totally right and totally wrong is this gray zone. Where the attorney goes, it's not all wrong, but it's not what you call a bright light fighting. Okay? Now let's say you're doing business, and the people you're doing business with only do business in the bottom section of this gray zone. And you as a human being don't believe that's right. You're only supposed to be doing business in the white portion of that area. If you're on a team of people working in a company and that bothers your conscience, the answer is going to be that our company, we run our company right here next to the bottom of the dark gray. We appreciate what you think about the light gray, but we're running in the dark gray. There's pressure on you to bend your thinking on how you do that work. So the reason the culture that you work in is so important to line up your personal culture with what the culture is at work. Don't tell me nobody's ever experienced this. I guarantee you, if you've worked 40 years doing anything, anywhere, you have experienced this. All right? I can take physician coding. You can throw in an extra code. It's not exactly wrong, but it's probably not right, but you get paid more. I know how this works. What are you laughing at? You better not. You actually work for me. You darn well better keep it straight. Okay. So, and it has to do with, it doesn't matter what crowd you go to either. So I don't mean anything offensive by this, but when I go to the general conference this summer, there's an enormous amount of pressure on me to conform with the far right side of the bell curve. And if you know me personally, politically, I'm a little bit to the right. Socially, I'm a little bit to the left. And most of the things they're talking about are dealing with social issues, in my opinion. And I'm not to the right on that. And me having to conform to that for a whole week was hard for me. Okay. I had people yak at me about things that I didn't want to yak about. And wanted me to believe things that I just honestly don't believe. You understand what I'm trying to say here? So I want you to understand the first lesson of this, whether it's in Daniel's time or our time, we all face the pressure of pluralism. And how you choose to deal with that in your own life is the issue you have to work out with God. I can't work that out for you. That's the beautiful thing about the first lesson. Okay? You've got to decide where you draw your line. Do you cheat on your income taxes or don't you? I can tell you 10 ways you can cheat on your income taxes and nobody will know. I'm an accountant, right? Should you do that is the question. In my opinion, no. But I know a lot of people who the answer is yes unless they get caught. Understand what I'm saying? Okay. And just keep that in the back of your brain. Well, first of all, anybody want to comment on that? Uh-oh, be careful. I didn't think that was a discussion.
Situation that applies to this is Twitter.
Yes.
Elon Musk bought Twitter. Hundreds of people have quit their job because of the culture that he's bringing to the company.
Yes.
And they refuse to work with that.
1,500 in the last week have quit, not been fired.
They quit.
Which is in its own problem. You know, it'd take me a day to unpack Elon Musk.
There are some gray zones that we all tend to cross very quick. For instance, if you drive very late at night and there's no one looking, there's a stop sign, do you come to a full stop? Lauren does. But I don't know if I come to a full stop at late at night. And my excuse is there's nobody coming or going. I can see lights. Of course, I don't see pedestrians that might be walking across and whether travel. So there are the gray zones that we in our own minds tend to justify because of circumstances.
I agree with that. How many of you have been to traffic school because of a ticket? Let me see them. How many people have been more than once? Let me see them. How many people have been at least 5 times? Enough said. You're not wrong. I know that on the highway, I'm not supposed to go more than 70. So when I'm on my motorhome, I set the cruise on 70. When I'm in my other car, it's 80.
Yeah.
And I know I can get away with it most of the time. Now I can't get away with 85, but I can usually get away with 78, 79. One, there's usually somebody passing me, which is beautiful. Okay. And 2, at 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, that's where I was taught that God's angels leave the car. So No, we all face the gray zone all the time, and these kids did too. You want to save your life and bow down to something, you can serve God when you want it. What's the big deal? That's the issue. And the big deal is what's a moral compass for you that when you cross that line, the answer is no. And everybody's got to draw that line someplace else for them. And only you can decide that. Yeah. All right, lesson number 2. The precision of true faith. So let me read this to you too. The young men said, "We will not serve your gods. We believe our God is able to save us from your hand, and we believe he will. But if not,
we're going to serve him anyway. We serve and love God for him, not just because of what he can do for us. All right. How many times have you said in your own brain or have heard somebody say, I've served God my whole life. I can't believe this is happening to me. Or I've served God my whole life. God, I really need this. Oh, come on. It's in my life a lot. So let's just pick on me. Okay. This has been the worst year in my life. I don't need to go through why, but it all got capped off with the hurricanes. Okay. So, and there was about a week where I talked to Paula and I said, God hates me. That's the only thing that I can chalk this up to. And of course, Paula, as nice as she is, not sure God hates you, but I'm listening. And you know, it took me about 4 days to get over that. But it happens. It happens in all of our lives. You go through the fire yourself. And then you look at these guys and you go, these three served God because he was God, not because they could get anything in return. This is precise faith. It was just God, not God plus what I can get. Most of us want to serve God and we want the plus. You know, there's a quid pro quo that comes with this. I go to church, I pay tithe, I do offerings, I do the adopted family. I'm nice to my neighbors. I put my kids through all Christian schools, all Adventist Christian schools. What's going on up there?
And this was based on a love relationship with God, which as teenagers, even they communicated with God daily, several times a day.
Several times. Yes, ma'am. That's a true statement.
Well, I believe most of us, if not all of us, sometime in our life, we're going to have a fiery furnace experience.
Yes.
And it can be different for everybody. You can get testing, sealing time, and the question is, can you make it through that? You come out the other side, what did you learn from it? Because I think it's rare that what the sinful world is likely to touch everybody in some fashion to some degree.
Agreed.
You're gonna have to, whether it's a job situation, a health situation,
A house
relationship,
situation.
family, whatever. So it's a lesson in just what's your furnace.
Right.
It's a big
And what
furnace.
gets you through the furnace. Yeah, please.
I was kind of thinking the same way. To me, this whole thing, the powerful part is the even if. And I feel like life 80-20 is more the even if than the coming out unscathed.
Yes.
And so to me, powerful faith is those people that come out with the even if, and they have the even if, and they're still praising God.
And
That's
when you see somebody like that still praising God, it makes an amazing impact on the music.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Yes.
He mentioned something intriguing. When we go through the fire furnace, we might learn something, but unfortunately, as a human, we do the same thing. Same all over, same mistake. We never learn anything. That's the way I look at it. I look at myself. I don't know about you guys, but I look at myself.
So that would go along with the story of history rarely repeats itself, but it certainly rhymes. Yes, please.
I was thinking as a mother, think about the three young men. And when you think about where did they learn to love and worship God like that?
From their dad and mom.
From just like that. And then their parents were not there to tell them what to do in a situation like that. Because we tend to really try to help our kids and tell them what to do in those situations. The other thing is the way we as parents play in the gray area has a great impact on the way our kids are going to play in the gray area. And they may choose to go to the darker side because you always start so slightly on the bright side to their parents. So this is one thing. The other thing is I dare to say about the king that God loved this king nearly as much, bear with me, as he loves David. And I tell you why. He chose this king to tell him what was going to happen in the future. He didn't need to do so. But God chose that one king. Second, in the furnace situation, if God had allowed the three guys to die, they would be saved. No doubt. But what about the king? So God kept those three guys alive. And I think it was because he loves that king so much that he wanted to show that king, listen, this is the way. So I guess those are my thoughts.
All right. So in summary, guys, these three were spiritually fireproof before the crisis ever took place.
Yeah.
And I think our job is to be spiritually fireproof, and you only do that on your own too. So the beautiful of these lessons is that lesson number one is only for you as a human being, you in your own brain. Lesson number two is also up to you in your relationship to God. It's not dependent upon anybody else. All right. Lesson number three, the promises of suffering. And this is where it is, it gets irritating. So here we go. The king is white hot. The fire is heated up. The soldiers die because of the heat. The king looks in and he sees two shocking things. First of all, these guys are walking around. And second of all, there's a fourth person in there that looks like the son of the gods. Folks, in the Bible, furnaces and fire are a metaphor for trouble and suffering. You can go through the Bible, and everywhere you get to fire, you get to a furnace, it is God refining something for betterment. All right. So suffering's inevitable. Have you ever heard of the book of Job? Whether it was a metaphor or a real story matters very little. It's in the canon, and it took place. So if you don't believe that, go just read Job, and especially read Job 5:7. So many of us believe that if I'm suffering, there is something wrong. So here's the point. Jesus led a perfect life, and he suffered greatly. Why do you get a pass? And then I had to think about that, because it wasn't but 2 weeks ago I decided God hated me. Okay? So suffering relates to your character like fire relates to gold. Do you really want to know your own heart? If you haven't suffered some, you really don't know what your own heart is. Second of all, if you've never suffered, how can you possibly be a person that can relate to other people? Because everybody else has. And if you're going to be the hands and feet of God on this earth, and you've never had any bumps in your life, how in the world can you relate to everybody else around you? Third thing is, if you want to have a profound trust in God, there are times in your life that you are just going to have to rely on God to carry you, even though you may not see him or feel him. And when you look back, you're going to see one set of footprints, and it's not yours. It's his. But at the time, it feels like yours. Last thing is, hang on a second. Last thing is, if you really want to be wise about life and understand how things really work, if you've had no suffering, there is no wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
No, just when you said that, to empathize with others, that sentence always came to me when you said, how would you know if God is a healer if you were never sick? How would you know if he was a provider if you were never lacking?
Right.
You gotta go through it to understand.
Very difficult subject for me. How, on what premise that do we love God? On what premise? Because if you look at it at the human level, what kid really loves their parents if the parents are causing or perceived to be causing pain? You know, we respond to love, kindness, and generosity. We don't respond typically to getting beaten up, and there are years, this is a tough year, then you get, like, when you think you're done, there's the next one. And I remember my dad, he died of Parkinson's. And for 7 years, he was pretty much laying on the bed all stiff like this. And this was a man of God. Yet he never complained. And he always praised God. A big lesson for me, but how do you get to love for God when all these crazy bad things happen to you? Again, because we do respond naturally to love.
So, John, I don't have all those answers. I will say that in my own life, I sometimes have to choose to love God because I have faith on the other side is the right thing.
Okay, so that's it. It's a faith thing, isn't it?
For me, it is. I don't know about anybody else. Because there are times in my life when I go, really? I can't imagine, maybe I'm the only person here who's ever felt that, but that's okay. We'll just talk about me.
No, you're not.
And when I'm in those times, it's only the decision that I know God is God and that I have to have faith in what's coming that gets me through. Joseph.
Yeah, this is difficult. I don't disagree, John, but I think if you believe that the reward is not in this world, the reward is after, then what happens during Job's life, during my life, during your life, is not that relevant. What's relevant is what happens after.
Yeah, but when you look God, if there's no reward after.
Yeah, but there is.
I have to.
By
believe
faith,
in it.
right?
I have to-
By faith. And so, John, for me, now we've diverged into an area I didn't think we'd get into today. You ever heard of Pascal's choice? Okay, I don't need to draw it for you then. 3 of the 4 branches don't work. There's only one branch that works. And times in my life, when I'm looking at Pascal's choice, if you guys don't know what it is, just Google it this afternoon. There are times when I just have to believe there's a God and I have to believe there's a heaven. Because all the other choices lead me to a place that I don't like as a human being.
Exactly.
And there's nothing to lose by choosing to be with God.
Right.
Right.
It's still hard sometimes. Yes.
The question is God more interested in my comfort or my character?
Your character. My opinion. Otherwise, we'd all live cushy lives.
So there is a famous quote by Franklin, Holocaust survivor.
Yes.
And it says, suffering ceases to be suffering when you find meaning for yourself.
Well, I have a little more work to do.
Actually, I just want to point out, if you haven't read that book.
It's a good book.
It's a little tiny book.
Yeah.
Please read it.
It's a good book.
Which one?
Go ahead. Tell them the name of the book.
Yes, Victor Frankl.
Man's Search for Meaning.
In Search of Meaning, right?
Man's Search for Meaning, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the concentration camp.
Yes.
Carrie, what is it?
In Search of Meaning.
In search of meaning?
Yeah, in fact, we'll send it out.
I think
Lauren
it's
sent it.
Man's Search of Meaning.
Man's
yeah.
Search of Meaning, okay.
And didn't Paul say if we're willing to share in God's glory, we should be willing to share in suffering?
Of course. There's all kinds of things in the Bible about you suffering. We just don't like it. I mean, come on. I find you 85 Bible texts about suffering and going through the fire, and I'm going to be with you and all that stuff. But when wave after wave after wave after wave after wave hits, about the 10th wave, you kind of go, I'm not sure there's gonna be 11th.
I think God created laws, okay? And we have to obey those laws. We veered off the track when man sinned, right? And if you think of physical laws, right? If you jump off a tall building, what's gonna happen? You know, you're gonna die. In a similar way, the wages of sin is death and suffering. And it happens naturally. God is a God of love. And God does not necessarily intervene. If I jump off a tall building and I pray as much as I want to pray, and I deliberately jump off that building, what's going to happen? You know? And so sin has produced all of this. There are laws regarding sin. The wages of sin is death. I'm sorry.
All right, let's move on. So the promises of suffering, it is inevitable. Suffering refines character like fire refines gold. God says, I will walk with you in the furnace. Isaiah 43, fear not, I have redeemed you. I will be with you. Go read Isaiah 43. It's a great chapter. Who was with the three in the furnace? Jesus, according to the commentaries. It was biblically one of the first times Jesus was manifest on this earth outside of the New Testament, which is kind of remarkable when you think about that. You will feel Jesus walking in your small furnace once you realize that Jesus walked through the ultimate furnace for you already. And I hate to call your furnace a small furnace, but none of you died for the sins of the world. And if you, for me, when I put into perspective whatever furnace it is, and I look what Jesus did on this earth as a human being, my furnace gets really put into perspective very quickly. I'll send you the overheads. All right, guys, now I want to go on. Look, let me see what time it is. Yeah, all right. Lesson number 1. So I'm out of Timothy Keller now. This is, I got some thoughts. Lesson number 1. Only excellence gives you a platform to speak truth to power. Don't walk past these facts. These 3 men spent the best years of their lives serving a ruler that probably killed their extended families and enslaved their people. They most likely didn't agree with the king's policies, values, or the direction he was sending in the country. In spite of that, they chose to honor God and serve with excellence. And it was only because of that excellence that they got out an audition and a platform with the king. If these had been 3 schmoes, they'd have been thrown into the furnace without an audience. It was only because they had excellence going about them in everything that they did that the king took notice and went, before I kill you, can you just please do what I ask you to do? And it's only then that they had a witness to give to the king. And it was only then, after that witness, that the king said, I'm going to tear you to pieces if you mess with their God. All right. Lesson number 2. Trials are not always a sign of God's absence or punishment. This is a popular lie that permeates parts of Christianity today. If God loves you, he will never let you go through difficult times. Anybody know Joel Osteen? I just summed up his ministry in 1 sentence. I can't stand listening to his sermons. Okay? If you're going through tough times, it must mean that you did something wrong or you don't have enough faith. You ever had a saint tell you that? That drives me insane. I'm going through a tough time and you think your ministry to me is to tell me that you must be going through it because you don't have enough faith. I don't need any saints like that in my life. Okay. No problem. Is his mom here? Oh. That's what I love about grandkids that love their grandma. I'm gonna break down that door to find my grandma. When they were threatened with literal fire, it wasn't because they had done something wrong or because God had forgotten them. God had a bigger plan, plans that they weren't party to. Many times we walk through fire and we assume the worst. Am I being punished? Is God for real? But we don't see what God sees. Lesson number 3. Sometimes God does not choose to deliver us from the fire so that our testimony through the fire can showcase God's glory.
Amen.
I hate that notion. I got to be honest with you. It took me a while to put this on a piece of paper. Have you read the book of Job? I'm going to come back to the book of Job. He's another legend that went through suffering. And just like the 3 in our text, Job had to suffer. When things go wrong, we immediately reach out to God for relief. What happens when relief doesn't come? When the radiation doesn't work on the cancer? When the marriage is not restored? When the prodigal son doesn't come home? When those things happen, I have to go back to Pascal's choice. Either I have faith in God and an afterlife or I don't. It's the only thing that gets me through it. You're going to have to pick what gets you through it. Yes.
What's hard for me is that I know as a mother, if I can do anything for my child to make them feel better, I will. But God can't do that. So why isn't he?
I've just had that conversation with my wife in the last month. Couldn't agree with you more. If I could wave a magic wand, everything gets better.
That's just because we don't understand what better is.
Maybe.
God has a way of showing his love that we don't understand.
Yeah, and I got my own definition of better, and sometimes God's got his definition. And sometimes I don't like his definition.
Yeah, there you go. That's what it is.
Right? Yeah.
I just was backtrack with it about the fire. I was just thinking about this, that when the king realized it was these 3 Israelites, these the people who got the religion and they got the dream that, gave the frame. Then he's thinking, okay, maybe their God will keep them from dying in this fire. So I'm gonna eat it 7 times. I'm gonna get the best of this guy. And then he saw it down the fire and he realized he didn't get the best of it.
Yep. Whatever lesson of the universe God had for this king was important right here.
I think it's so important that we remember God's character. He is not the author of suffering. He isn't.
Right.
He's love. And if we feel suffering, I look at Jesus on the cross, he couldn't sense God's presence. God was there. So he had to exist in the feeling of God's absence, even though it was presence. So this idea, I struggle too. When I have struggle, it's like, where is God? Well, God is there. And he can't play this game the way the devil can play it. There are rules and he has to abide by them. And that's hard. He can't.
It's miserable.
It's miserable.
It's not fun. Yeah, I think, in our suffering, we have to understand too that God suffers with us. He is pain as we are pain.
See, now you're starting to speak my language.
And here is the thing, right? We serve a God who is all loving, all powerful. To the extent that he's a God of choice, right? And choices determine his power, really. I mean, he's all good, he's all powerful, he's all loving, but the all powerful intertwined with our loving Because a God of love allows choice, and choices are like the laws. You break those laws, it's a natural result.
Thank you. Rich, and then here.
Sometimes there's collateral damage.
Mm.
And in life and in these furnaces, the guy is, the soldier.
To die?
Because of furnace.
You don't know that.
Sometimes.
Sometimes stuff just happens. Yeah.
I really think you and I suffer, let's just take you and me. We don't suffer nearly as much as we could suffer. And in other words, I have the feeling that God did a lot of the suffering for us. We think it's bad when we go through troubles. When we have to pay twice what we thought we were gonna pay to re-roof our home. I mean, that's nothing compared to what's really suffering.
Agreed.
When we get a cancer that
Can't cure.
may not be cured. Think of what God went through. Jesus took a lot of the suffering away from us. He did a lot of the stuff that we deserve, but yet he took it for us. So that's one of the consolations I think we have when we are suffering. It certainly could be worse if God were not on our side.
I also think that there is the right temperature for the goals to be refined. And God knows us so well that he knows what is the right tension. So when I'm walking and I see, for example, kids that are with some type of disability or something, I try not to even look. And my first thought is like, Lord, thank you. You know that maybe this was a suffering that I couldn't take. That's how I feel. I have other sufferings, but that one that is so, that's the one that I think God's like, okay, I won't give this one to you because that's the tension will be maybe too much. So there are things that I look at God and I think he's refining me. I'm a path to be refined, but he is like there. Sometimes he's like increasing the temperature, but he goes until a limit that he knows that I won't just melt completely, maybe. So that's what I'm thinking.
So, thank you. And so lesson 3 continued. Sometimes there's no happy ending, and sometimes there's no riding off into the sunset. Sometimes it's only through the pain, through the fire, that the world truly sees what faith in God looks like. Not when things are going well, but when we're standing in the midst of the fire. Lesson 4, and I'm done. Instead of asking God to remove you from the fire, start looking for Jesus with you in the fire. Instead of asking for relief, ask for Jesus. We intellectually know that Jesus is always with us in the middle of the storm. Emotionally, it's not always true. We are called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. When we see others walking through the fire, they will see Jesus when you choose to be the hands and feet of Jesus and willingly step into the fire with them. Which means you're not only supposed to take your own suffering, you're supposed to help with other people's as well. That is why we have to live together in community. That's the reason God called us to community. That's the reason he wants you to know what's going on in your community. And that's the reason we're supposed to reach out and be a part of what's going on around us.
Amen.
So guys, that was my hardcore lesson for the week. Glad God gave this to me to teach because I actually needed it. And let's bow our heads. Thank you so much for your love. Thank you for being with us even when we are going through trials. We know in this world that it is not a perfect world by any stretch of the imagination. And yet we know that we're here to reflect you to others.
Amen.
Help us, Lord, to walk with you through every trial and to also help us walk with others as they go through their trials. Give us your strength and glory. We pray this in your name.
Amen.
Have a good week, everybody.